This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Stuart Titus, Chief Executive Officer and President at Medical Marijuana. Medical Marijuana is a cannabis product research and development company. The company offers various CBD oils and related products such as CBD tinctures, concentrates, beauty products, and pet supplements. Medical Marijuana distributes its products to worldwide customers. Stuart, thank you for joining us.
Well, a great pleasure to be with you today.
So what was your background before starting Medical Marijuana? What did you do before this?
Well, previously, I worked on Wall Street. I was a bond trader and underwriter for Credit Suisse First Boston. I worked on the street for 11 years. And after that, just had enough of the fast-paced lifestyle and all the corporate politics in New York, and got into a totally different field, the field of physiotherapy, pain management, injury rehabilitation. I was doing a lot of work with high-level sport athletes. And it was very interesting that here, many of the contact sport athletes in particular were using cannabis to help control pain, decrease inflammation, help with sleep at night. And I saw so much of this, I started searching, and I did find that in the global arena that there were these medical cannabis symposiums that were given about every other year. And I attended my first medical cannabis symposium in 2004. Wow, it just opened my eyes to a whole new world of therapeutic application from the extracts of the cannabis plant, the cannabinoids that had tremendous research going on around the globe. And then a public company started in California, March of 2009, Medical Marijuana Incorporated. I certainly thought this had potential to be one of the next great growth industries in America, and just became involved as an investor. Over time, of course, I've taken on a more significant role with the company, and it was very interesting that back in 2011, the company was bought by a new group from Northern California who'd been researching hemp, CBD, and other non-psychoactive cannabinoids really since 2007, when I learned their plans to develop the first nutraceutical form of a non-psychoactive cannabinoid, CBD, and bring that to U.S. and world markets. I moved out to California and was here full time to take part in the evolution of the non-psychoactive cannabinoid space.
Well, great. So what excites you right now?
Well, there are a number of things, certainly. The upcoming potential legalization of cannabis here in the United States certainly is a tremendous phenomenon that many of us in the industry have been waiting for years. And of course, many cannabis advocates have been waiting for since the mid-1960s, when all of a sudden cannabis became a little bit more popular with the counterculture revolution. At the time, the Beatles, rock and roll music, war in Vietnam, et cetera. And certainly many of the war protesters were all very large cannabis advocates and users. But today, certainly, not only the emergence of the non-psychoactive cannabinoids to rival THC and other psychoactive forms of cannabis, I'm very excited about the potential industrial applications for the hemp plant. Of course, hemp now being brought back as an agricultural crop, and things such as hemp building, construction materials, of course, your hemp textiles, but then getting into things such as hemp batteries and supercapacitors because of the amazing capability to store and transfer electrical energy, I think has got great application. And then, of course, outside the cannabis arena into the new emergence of the psychedelics arena, I think holds great promise for investors as well.
Great. So we have a lot of investors and startups that listen to the show. For those investors out there, what's your advice to them about investing in startups? What do you tell them to do before they invest in a startup in this sector?
Well, certainly there's a lot of due diligence being required, but for any investment in a startup business, of course, it's very high risk and very speculative. So I always encourage investors to have maybe a barbell type strategy where on one side you have a good amount of your money in some very stable, conservative investments that certainly will produce a nice return or expected return over time. And then maybe another portion of your investments into the more speculative sector with some of these emerging startup companies, because every so often one really comes along and hits a home run, so to speak. So, of course, you want to look at the management team, see what their past track record has been, their pedigree, if they've been successful in bringing startups to market previously, et cetera. certainly quality names. If you're involved with a fellow like Bruce Linton, who former CEO, say, of Canopy Growth, and he's starting up a new venture, well, it might be quite interesting to take a look at. Of course, Bruce was able to raise $4 billion US dollars from Constellation Brands, a New York Stock Exchange traded company. So certainly that type of pedigree is something that an investor might want to look at when he's looking at a potential startup that will go through the development stage process, potentially become public, and then maybe have a nice exit strategy for the investors. So looking at all these steps together, I think, is something that you really need to do.
And so for that startup that wants to start their own CBD company, what's your advice for them before they go out to raise funding? What should they do first?
Well, certainly you want to look at the market arena. Obviously, there are a tremendous number of companies now selling CBD products out there. And of course, the market is continually expanding, and there's room for new innovation all the time. Certainly, companies selling current standard products are going to have a difficult time kind of breaking into the market, but nonetheless, certainly there are great potentials and great opportunities. But the innovation of certain products, or if you've got a new wrinkle or twist, or maybe you've got a new cannabinoid, or maybe a new combination, cannabinoid terpenoid, or cannabinoid with another herbal blend, maybe a special topical, something that's a little bit unique that can separate and differentiate yourself from the field, I think certainly that would be one that has potential legs, and I think would be able to get a fair amount of investor funding if you can present your idea in the proper manner.
Great. So let's talk about the state of marijuana. How do you see the industry evolving from here?
Well, certainly this has been a tremendous run year during the COVID environment, in that marijuana and cannabis, of course, is now considered an essential service. I really think this has great application for banking reform, banking regulation. And then, of course, now with the new administration and changes in Congress, where we believe certainly now the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, very, very pro-cannabis, and I believe will certainly allow more in the way of legislative bills to come to the Senate floor and potentially be up for vote. I'm very optimistic and cautiously optimistic that we might actually see some movement on federal legalization, possibly as early as this summer. My anticipated date might be July 1st if I had to put a formal number on it, but certainly this has the potential to totally reshape the entire cannabis industry. This will allow us to bank more as a normal business does, and particularly remove this onerous 280E, the IRS tax regulations, so that the large multi-state operators and other cannabis operators will then be able to take the normal business deductions that most businesses will be. And of course, this will add significantly to their bottom line. And I think eventuality of cannabis legalization is already being priced into some of the current stocks and stock market prices. But nonetheless, looking at the growth curve and what could potentially happen with federal legalization, looking what happened in Canada, I think the U.S. still is, on a relative basis, very undervalued compared to some of the Canadian licensed producers. And I think there's great opportunity for many of the current multi-state operators in the cannabis industry to make some great strides forward. I mean, we've seen groups such as Harvest Health with nice presence in Arizona. I mean, gosh, 3-4 months ago, that was $1 stock, and now they're $4 today. So, those type of returns are certainly available. On the pharmaceutical side, we've seen companies such as GW Pharma with their wonderful Epidiolex product doing about $500 million in sales as of last year, but just receiving a $7.2 billion buyout offer from Jazz Pharmaceuticals, an Irish-based pharmaceutical group. And certainly combination of GW Pharma getting in with Jazz, I think, is going to add significant value to the overall enterprise that Jazz Pharmaceuticals has been developing. I think there are many other up-and-coming cannabinoids that are ripe for development in the pharmaceutical space. I believe CBG has at least 2, maybe more indications for potential use. Wouldn't be terribly surprised to see a couple of up-and-coming pharmaceutical companies looking to develop a CBG-based pharmaceutical medication in the very near future as well.
Well, great. Well, before COVID, full legalization across the country was predicted to happen around 2030. But now after COVID, it seemed like it's speeding up. When do you think we'll see full legalization now that things are moving faster, for the need of taxes and jobs.
Yes, it's been wonderful to see, of course, the initial state, Colorado, doing so well. I believe over $2 billion in sales this year or in 2020 of cannabis. So this is bringing tremendous tax revenue to their bottom line. I mean, gosh, $300 million a year plus in federal and rather state generated tax revenue. And certainly now with the federal legalization, there's a potential to have an overall 5% federal excise tax on all cannabis sales, which would be tremendous. I mean, certainly the industry's got tremendous potential. They're capturing more and more market share every year from this black illicit market. And really believe that currently now we have 35 U.S. states with medical cannabis laws on their books, 15 with recreational use. But it was very interesting at the end of alcohol prohibition that there was actually a constitutional referendum that took place. Back then we had 48 U.S. states. And at the time, it took 75% of the states to vote positive for the end of alcohol prohibition. Interestingly enough, Utah, a very conservative state, was the state that cast the 36th and deciding ballot to actually legalize alcohol after years of prohibition. And this was done again by constitutional referendum. Now, currently today, we have 50 U.S. states, so that would mean 38 would need to vote positive for cannabis reform, be it recreational or at least medical. And we already have 35 of the U.S. states with medical cannabis laws on their books. I believe the programs in all those states are doing extraordinarily well. Patients are very happy. Certainly, revenues that are coming into the states look tremendous. There aren't any negative consequences. We don't see bar fights breaking out in many of these states, especially with recreational cannabis. Certainly, we believe it's a lot safer than alcohol. And if we can get to 38 U.S. states, which I believe by the end of this year, there'll be at least 3 other states coming online with legislative reform. So here we have the opportunity to actually have a constitutional amendment that will legalize at least medical, if not overall recreational cannabis within the country. So there are a number of different avenues for this. Certainly there are bills going through Congress right now, but I'd really like to believe that everything will be much accelerated from that 2030 timeframe you were mentioning previously and brought forth very, very rapidly.
So let's talk about the challenges in the space for both startups and investors. What challenge do you see your startups facing in this space right now, aside from the banking financial issue? What else do they struggle with?
Well, many companies, especially if they're selling hemp and CBD or non-psychoactive products, are generally doing a lot of business online, which means merchant processing and the rest. Certainly, merchant processing fees have come down very significantly, but still it's more of a higher risk type business, particularly for a new company to get established and get any kind of reasonable rates in terms of merchant processing is very challenging. They're going to be very high rates, and many times those merchant processors will hold back a lot of funds in anticipation of chargebacks or other issues that may arise. So certainly for the startup, you just have to go through the process, and over time you'll get yourself more and more established, and this will help you to do a lot more merchant processing. Currently, there are now a number of merchant processors actually looking for business when previously they were trying to shun as much of that business as possible. Of course, they're all kind of logistical concerns. Your packaging and labeling. Now the FDA is becoming a little bit more vigilant in terms of the CBD industry in particular. They haven't stepped into the THC and dispensary side yet, but certainly on the CBD side, they're watching groups who might potentially make unsubstantiated claims or who might improperly label their products as having ingredients that potentially would be classified as a food rather than a dietary supplement, or ingredients that might be classified as a medicine, as a dietary supplement, et cetera. So there are all kind of challenges in that regard, and just other things in terms of your certificates of analysis, your laboratory testing, making sure that you have the correct cannabinoid profile. If you claim you have 17% CBD in your product, then maybe your COA should come to a very close tolerance to being able to match that on a very consistent basis. Your lot by lot or batch by batch processing, those COAs need to be as consistent as you possibly can. Of course, you got to watch for other agricultural residue or any toxic pesticides, heavy metals, et cetera, that might have come through in the agricultural process, et cetera. So those are some of the things that you want to look out for. And then as well, just in case there happen to be any adverse effects, we haven't really seen much in the industry, fortunately, but just in case there's a customer who takes a product and has a bad experience with it, well, you might need to report that to the FDA. So make sure you got that situation lined up just in the eventuality. So those are some of the things to look at if you're a startup, and hopefully be able to overcome some of these logistical concerns so you can get out to the marketplace with a nice marketing program and start to sell some of your wonderful products to consumers.
Great. And then on the other side of the table, what challenge do you see investors struggle with in funding these startups in the CBD space?
Well, I think some of the funding tends to come and go in cycles, but currently the funding seems to be a little bit easier now with the move coming towards overall cannabis legalization. Now, a year ago or so, that certainly was the exact opposite. Very, very difficult to raise investor money because many of the prospects were uncertain. A number of things had been quasi-legal, like CBD, for example. Well, made legal by federal law, the 2018 Farm Bill or the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. And yet the FDA has not given it its blessing as a full dietary supplement, nor has the FDA given it its blessing as a food ingredient. So that tends to set up a little conundrum with many groups such as ourselves wanting to market our products, say through large chain retail outlets, maybe at health food stores such as Whole Foods or through pharmacies or even getting into dispensaries. Certainly these avenues have been very much closed down and still remain closed down due to various regulations. But say, for example, if the FDA were to come along, give their blessing as a dietary supplement, I think you'd see CBD being sold widely on grocery store shelves, gas stations, and certainly in pharmacies such as CVS or Walgreens. So for investors, I mean, there's always a risk-reward type scenario. Certainly if we get across some of the hurdles now and get the FDA to move or get Congress to actually carve out a pathway. I believe there are a couple of bills in Congress right now that will actually approve CBD as a dietary supplement as well as a food ingredient. I think that's going to open up a tremendous number of additional marketing sources for companies that are established and have been able to survive this COVID situation. So I believe there's a lot more investor money coming in. Certainly the cannabis side, the multi-state operators will have great avenues and prospects with the overall cannabis legalization. Certainly, we believe a lot more institutions here in the U.S. will be able to invest in U.S. companies versus channeling their money up to Canadian licensed producers, where that's the only avenue they can currently legally invest in. So certainly that's another great potential benefit with the legalization of cannabis here in the United States. And certainly investors should be aware of some of the potential benefits on the upside as well as the risks on the downside.
Right. Well, there are many subsectors and applications in this sector. If you had to pick one or two that are top of the list for investors to pursue, what would you call out?
Well, I think the emergence of some of these little silos or subsectors of the market arena have been phenomenal to watch. I believe back in 2014, right about when this vape phenomena was just coming forth, and all of a sudden, wow, there was a tremendous consumer demand for vape products. And I really was astounded to see how well accepted these were among cannabis and CBD users. So certainly that was a sector that started from ground zero, say back in 2012, 13, even 2014, and grew tremendously. Also, back when I believe we were part of a group that got the first infused products license in Colorado. This was something that the edible or infused products were brand new to the cannabis side. And although people for many years have been making cannabis butters, et cetera, they really hadn't been so commercially available. And now you go to the local dispensaries and you'll see a tremendous amount of edible products because people are really seeing the tremendous value and benefit. Maybe you don't get the immediate high, but certainly you get a very interesting, long-lasting effect that many regular cannabis users are really looking very much forward to. So the emergence and growth of the edible sector has been phenomenal to see. Current trend that's really hot the last few weeks is something fairly new, this concept of Delta 8 THC, and particularly that some of the new progressive hemp growers have been able to actually derive the Delta 8 from hemp, which may make it quasi-federally legal. But certainly there are many consumers who are really seeing some great benefit with Delta 8. Of course, with your Delta 9 or your typical edibles, many regular cannabis users like a very, very high concentration. And if you're a new cannabis user, taking some of that very high concentration product might give you a lot of anxiousness, a lot of paranoia, maybe a rapid heartbeat, or symptoms that you can't particularly well control. So it's certainly been something that two sides to this evolution in the edible market, but it does seem that consumers find a much softer approach and a better entryway into the cannabis arena by using Delta 8 because it's not quite as concentrated as you would find in Delta 9. So individuals don't get that anxiousness or anxiety, but they get a very nice, to quote the Eagles, a nice, peaceful, easy feeling, perhaps. Certainly, we see a tremendous interest over the past few weeks in smoke shops and other outlets where people can buy Delta 8. I think this is a very, very interesting trend. It has great long-term potential. So to take advantage of some of these new emerging silos and sectors, of course, we have so many incredible people here in the United States. The entrepreneurial spirit is just amazing. I can't wait to see what the next new silo to come along is really going to capture market attention and maybe better ways of delivering cannabis and cannabinoids, or maybe it's a new way to deliver a topical application with greater bioavailability. Maybe it's a new type of inhaler that doesn't necessarily use heat, but another way to absorb cannabinoids better than perhaps just the oral ingestion process. Quite excited about the future and certainly believe that there are going to be some great innovations coming on the next few months and years.
Great. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Well, no, I just briefly touched on the psychedelics industry. Certainly, this is an interesting emerging market sector that I believe has so many parallels that I see it back to the cannabis industry back in the 2012, 13, 14 era. Now we're starting to see many states starting to decriminalize. Certainly, we'd like to believe at some point there might be a cutoff limit, such as, for example, the differentiation between marijuana and hemp, 0.3% THC. Obviously, over that is considered marijuana. Below that, considered hemp. And certainly, this has the ability to transform or play out in the psychedelics arena because many people are doing very, very well with lower doses or what they call micro doses of psychedelics. And yes, if you're going to see a doctor and they recommend, and now many medical professionals, interestingly enough, are seeing some tremendous benefit with their patients, particularly the depression patients who they've struggled for years and years with. Sometimes just one good dose of psychedelics just seems to hit the reset button for these individuals and allow for better levels of certain brain chemicals, neurotransmitters to be produced. There's quite a lot of science and research going on here now, and it's amazing to see the acceptance in the medical community. But certainly there might be this threshold level. Well, over this particular amount, yes, you need a doctor prescribed or you need to have it medically supervised, but maybe there'll be something such as a dietary supplement version with a lower dose, a microdose of these psychedelics so that people can just use them for overall health and wellness, perhaps mental clarity or just whatever it is. So I see a lot of very similar investment opportunities as well because now some of the emerging psychedelics companies are raising investor capital. Most of them are listing up in Canada, waiting for some changes in the law here in the US, but certainly they're very progressive up in Canada and have actually awarded licenses for groups to potentially cultivate mushrooms and then extract the psilocybin for medical purposes. I think that's a very interesting sector for investors to look at as well. Many cannabis companies are now starting to merge into the psychedelics arena. I think there's a group, Hollister Biosciences, that's actually doing both the cannabis as well as the psychedelic product development. course.
Great. So how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Well, our company, Medical Marijuana Incorporated, we're publicly traded, our ticker symbol MJNA. Our website, www.medicalmarijuanainc.com. And our email would be investors@medicalmarijuanainc.com. Certainly our sales divisions, Canaway, as well as Hemp Meds, all have their own websites, and you can just search Hemp Meds or Canaway online and get in touch with us that way as well.
Great. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Well, thank you so very much for the opportunity. Always great to talk cannabis and other emerging sectors with you, and we definitely look forward to more for investors over time here.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Hall T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.